All right, we are continuing our study through the book of Revelation here on the Listener's Commentary. And in this recording, we're going to be looking at Revelation chapter 12, verses 1 through 17. And as we have kind of described the overall structure of the book of Revelation, we have said that beginning in chapter 12, it's like starting Act 2 of the play. That chapter 11, the curtain falls and Act 1 kind of comes to an end, and we have a brief intermission, a brief pause. And then as chapter 12 opens, it's like we've begin Act 2 of the play. And the reason we've said that is because there's a definite shift in the story here. As chapter 11 wrapped up Act 1, right? And chapter 12 then opens up Act 2. You can sense the shift. There's new characters beginning in chapter 12. Those new characters come with new props and new stage design, sort of. And those new characters were hinted at in the first part of the book, chapters 1 through 11, but now they take center stage, and really everything from chapter 12 is all going to be about these new characters and how God is going to deal with them. And those new characters are primarily the dragon, the beast from the sea, and the beast from the earth. Those are the three new characters that show up here. And the rest of the story is really going to involve them and their actions and God's response to them. And so the story does take a definitive turn here. The seventh trumpet at the end of chapter 11 brought us up to the end of time and the restoration of all things. But clearly the story of Revelation isn't over yet, right? There's still more book to be read. Well, what happens is we now go back and retrace our steps again, and this time we learn about who and what lies behind it all, who and what lies behind all the hostility towards God's people and towards God's purposes and towards what God is doing in the world, and we learn what God is going to do about it. In fact, the next few chapters, Revelation 12 through 14, many have referred to them as the theological heart of the book. And the reason for that is because what John does is he pulls back the curtain to show the original readers and us what's really going on in the world. And as we read through the rest of the book, just a reminder, as we enter into chapters 12, 13, and 14, we got to remember to keep the original setting and the original audience in mind, right? The original audience were the 7 churches of Asia, and John himself is on exile on the island of Patmos. And these people are suffering. Some of them are being tempted to compromise and accommodate culture. There's opposition and temptation that presses upon them. There are hardships that are happening to them because they happen to all people just by virtue of living in the fallen world. I think that's one of the points of the 7 seals. There are terrible things that happen in the world, and they come as judgments from God. And their focus is more on the ungodly world, the hardened people, their warnings of repentance. I think that's the focus of the 7 trumpets. And the question then is, well, what lies behind all of this? Who is the real enemy? And Revelation 12, 13, and 14 introduce us to who the real enemy is. So, the curtain has fallen. There's been a brief intermission. Now the stage has been reset, and we're ready to open up the curtain again for Act 2 of the book of Revelation. And it begins like this. Revelation 12, verse 1 says, "A great sign appeared in heaven." And here's the sign. Here's what John sees. He sees a woman clothed with the sun, and the moon is under her feet. And on her head she had a crown of 12 stars. And she was pregnant. She cried out, being in labor and in pain, ready to give birth. This imagery for the woman really, in some ways, presents her almost like the queen of heaven, right? The sun, the moon, the stars all array her presentation and the way she looks. And such imagery, astrological imagery, sun, moon, and stars, was actually common in ancient paganism and in ancient myths. And there's a certain sense in what happens here in Revelation 12 is there's going to be a little bit of subverting some of those ancient pagan myths with the true story of the world, a true myth about God's people and what God is doing about it. But this imagery, while it was common in ancient paganism, also echoes the language for the 12 tribes of Israel. Genesis chapter 37, verse 9 says this, "Behold," Joseph speaking, "I have had yet another dream, and behold, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars were all bowing down to me." Do you hear the language that's similar to what we see here? And so this woman is the faithful remnant of God's people. And so she's not, some have mistakenly thought, oh, she's Mary. As you read this, we see she's going to give birth to the Messiah. But she's not just Mary. She's more than Mary because she persists after Mary in the story. So she actually represents the faithful remnant of God's people. And she's pregnant because she's going to bring God's Messiah into the world. And so God's faithful remnant is been preserved and protected and faithful to God. And now through them, God is going to bring his Messiah into the world. One technical note, notice it says she has a crown of 12 stars. The particular word used for crown there is Stephanos. That's a victor's crown. It is the crown that someone would receive for winning some sort of athletic contest or something like that. And it's consistently associated in the book of Revelation with God's faithful people who win, who are victorious, who overcome. We saw that in the messages to the 7 churches in chapter 2 and 3, that the one who overcomes will be given the crown, right? Well, this crown is consistently, this word Stephanos refers to God's faithful people consistently throughout the book of Revelation. The reason we have to note that is because we're about to be introduced to the next character in the second half of the book of Revelation, the dragon himself, and he has 7 crowns on his head, but it's a different word for crown because it refers to a kingly type crown. So we got to make sure that we don't get confused because we only have one English word for these 2 different types of crown. So as Act 2 of Revelation opens in chapter 12, the first thing John sees and writes down for us to see is the faithful remnant of God's people, Israel and all of God's people, now presented as the heavenly woman ready to give birth to the Messiah. But that's not all. So look at verse 3. "Then another sign appeared in heaven, and behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and on his heads were 7 crowns." We're going to actually be told who this dragon is very shortly. It's going to be one of the symbols in the book of Revelation that gets interpreted for us. He represents the devil. But he's portrayed here as a dragon, and not just any dragon. He's a 7-headed dragon, and he has 10 horns. Horns were in context of authority and power, they symbolize strength. They symbolize might. You can actually see that in the Psalms where the psalmist will talk about God lifting up his horn or grabbing hold of the horns. It's God's power. It's God's strength. So this dragon has 10 horns. That is, he has like full, masterful, mighty strength, great strength. And he's got 7 crowns. That is 7 crowns, one on each of his 7 heads. So you got a 7-headed dragon. Each head has a crown on it, 7 crowns. And the word for crown here is not Stephanos, as we just noted with the woman. It is the word diadema in Greek, which means royal crown. It's the crown of authority. So this dragon presents himself as having full authority. He's got 7 crowns, and the number 7 is consistently viewed in the book of Revelation as a number of fullness and completion, right? Because of the 7 days of creation, and specifically fullness that has to do with the earth. And so he presents himself here as having authority over the earth. He's a 7-headed dragon who he's got authority on earth. And verse 4 says, his tail swept away 1/3 of the stars of heaven and hurled them to the earth. And it's possible that this alludes to the idea of Satan leading the other angelic beings into a fall from heaven. That's really where we get that idea theologically, is from this passage. But it's not a major detail in the story. It's actually just kind of said in passing. And probably that's what it refers to. But what happens next is this. The dragon then stood before the woman who was about to give birth, so that when she gave birth, he might devour her child. So as John's watching the scene unfold, this heavenly woman is about to give birth to a child. The 7-headed dragon then comes up and stalks up on her. And as she's writhing in labor pains, he's waiting because he wants to devour the baby that's born to her. But here's what happens, verse 5. She gave birth to a son, a male, who's going to rule all the nations with a rod of iron, and her child was caught up to God and to his throne. Notice there in verse 5, the drama presents the birth, the life, and the exaltation of Jesus. Just very briefly, the woman gives birth to a son. It's the Messiah. He's going to rule the nations with a rod of iron. More on that in a second, but that's actually an allusion to Psalm 2, a messianic psalm. So the Messiah is born. He's going to be king over all the nations. The dragon wants to devour him, but can't. The dragon's actually rescued and caught up to God and to his throne and seated on the throne. And so the dragon's attempt to get the child fails, and the child is exalted and now reigning over all on the throne with God. And he's going to rule all the nations. Notice that. Not just some of the nations, not just one or two of the nations, all the nations with a rod of iron. And as I noted, that's an allusion to Psalm chapter 2, verses 8 and 9, which was a well-known psalm about God's king, the Messiah. It says this, "Ask it of me, and I will certainly give the nations to you as your inheritance, and the ends of the earth as your possession. You shall break them with a rod of iron. You shall shatter them like earthenware." And so the Messiah, God's appointed king, is going to rule all the nations, and he's going to usher in God's kingdom. So here we get the nativity story, the Christmas story, but in a very different sort of way. And that's why at times I've actually preached Revelation 12 as a Christmas text. And I've talked about there being a dragon in the nativity, a red dragon specifically, a seven-headed red dragon who wants to devour the male child but fails in his quest to do that. And this dramatic representation of the birth and exaltation of Jesus the Messiah actually helps us understand how the book of Revelation works. One of the things we clearly learn from these few verses is that Revelation doesn't work chronologically. Why do I say that? Well, because at the end of chapter 11, that was the end of time and final judgment. But here we are now getting the birth of the Messiah. So we've clearly gone back in time to the birth of the Messiah. So chapter 12 chronologically happens before chapter 11. So the book of Revelation isn't organized chronologically. So we can't read it that way. And also, this little section shows us that the book of Revelation doesn't work literally. It's picture language. You can't take the pregnant woman here literally as Mary, because Mary's not literally clothed with the sun, moon, and stars. Mary didn't literally wear a crown. And in what follows, Mary didn't literally flee into the desert. Right? It's not literal. This is picture language. There's not literally a dragon wherever Mary was giving birth standing there waiting. It's picture language that's intended to communicate a meaning, not a meaning less than the imagery, a meaning greater than the imagery. But the imagery is the vehicle for communicating that meaning. And so that's the way the book of Revelation works. Not chronologically, not literally. It's picture language. So the dragon's attempt to eat the child fails. The child, the Messiah, is exalted to his throne as king over the nations. And then the drama of chapter 12 continues. Look at verse 6. The woman fled into the wilderness where she had a place prepared by God so that there she would be nourished for 1,260 days. Notice that this woman that gave birth to Messiah now persists beyond the exaltation of the Messiah, right? Why? Because she pictures not just the faithful remnant throughout the Old Testament, but the faithful remnant of God's people now who follow the Messiah. We'll actually see that in what comes. She is the faithful remnant of God's people. And she fled into the wilderness. Now, we'll get more details on her fleeing to the wilderness in a second in what follows. And what we'll see is she's actually given wings by God to flee into the wilderness. And that imagery of being given wings echoes the Exodus, where God says that he carried Israel on wings out of Egypt and into the wilderness. So it's probably best to understand this as a picture here of the present pilgrimage of God's people. Just like the people of Israel were led into the wilderness by God's redemptive hand, well, God's people now are on pilgrimage to the final city at the present time. So God's people in Christ are living between their redemption and they're a final arrival at the promised land, and they're cared for by God. That seems to be what this is a picture of. And she has a place prepared for 1,260 days. That 1,260 days is equivalent to the 42 months that we saw in chapter 11 with the two witnesses. And we looked at the significance of that term there, where it had come in the thinking of Jews of the day to refer to a time of suffering and opposition and hostility for God's people. And so we looked at some of the details there. You can refer back to that if you want. Craig Keener, a Bible scholar, expert in kind of cultural backgrounds, says that Revelation seems to use 42 months, 1,260 days, not so much for the length of time, but for the kind of time. It's a time of trouble and tribulation that John himself is experiencing, the original audience was experiencing when he wrote it, that God's people throughout their pilgrimage to their final destination will experience. That seems to be the idea. So, in this vision, in the drama of this vision, there's this woman. She gives birth to the Messiah. The dragon wants to devour the Messiah. Doesn't work. He's actually exalted and now seated on his throne as ruler of the nations. The woman then flees into the desert to be protected from the dragon himself. And then what follows in verses 7 through 9 seems to be sort of like the outflow of the coronation of the Messiah. When the Messiah is exalted, seated on his throne, and crowned as king, well, here's one of the effects of that. Here's one of the things that happens. There was war in heaven, and Michael, the archangel, one of the ruling angels, Michael and his angels were waging war with the dragon. And the dragon and his angels fought back, waged war with them, and they didn't prevail. And there was no longer a place found for them in heaven. So they're cast down. So it's all out war in heaven. As a result of now Messiah coming and being exalted, it's all out war in heaven. Michael and his army of angels engage in battle against the dragon and his army. The dragon's army was no match for Michael and his angelic army. And so the dragon and his host are thrown down out of heaven. They're cast out of heaven and they're thrown down to the earth. Look at verse 9. And the great dragon was thrown down. The serpent of old. Here we learn who the dragon represents. The serpent of old, hearkening back to Genesis chapter 3, who is called the devil or Satan. He deceives the whole world. He was thrown down to the earth, and his angels were thrown down with him. I find this interesting because in the Gospel of John, John chapter 12, verse 23, on the very eve of his crucifixion, listen to what Jesus says. This is John 12, 23 and following. But Jesus answered them by saying, "The hour has come for the Son of Man to be glorified. Now my soul has become troubled. And what am I to say? Father, save me from this hour? But for this purpose I came to this hour. Father, glorify your name." Then a voice came out of heaven and said, "I have both glorified it and will glorify it again." So the crowd who stood by heard it, were saying that it thunders. Others were saying an angel had spoken to them. But Jesus responded and said to them, "This voice has come not for my sake, but for your sake." And then listen to this line. This is the line that I find fascinating in view of Revelation here. This is John 12:31. "Now judgment is upon this world. Now the ruler of this world will be cast out." Cast out has the same idea as thrown down. He's going to be defeated. He's going to lose his place as a result of what Jesus is going to do by virtue of the cross and then his resurrection, and then his exaltation. It's very similar thematically to what is portrayed in picture language in the book of Revelation. Jesus' death, burial, resurrection, and exaltation to heaven is a way for God to be glorified, Jesus to be exalted, and the devil is defeated by that. He loses his place, and he no longer has any place. He's cast down to heaven. Then I heard a loud voice in heaven saying, "Now the salvation and the power and the kingdom of our God and the authority of his Christ have come. For the accuser of our brothers and sisters has been thrown down, the one who accuses them before God day and night." So Jesus won the victory by means of his death, resurrection, and ascension into heaven. His coronation, his crowning moment. Right now he is reigning as king over all the nations, and he will reign forever and ever. That's the idea. He is king. And the kingdom of God now has come. It's begun. It's broken into this world. And someday it's going to come fully and completely. But it's already been inaugurated. Jesus is already on the throne, and he's already king. And the dragon, that is the devil, he's been defeated and he's been cast down. Now, how do the followers of Jesus then engage in this battle? How do they win the victory? How do they overcome in view of the fact that Jesus won by virtue of his self-giving love on the cross and then his resurrection and ascension? What do the followers of Jesus do? Well, look at verse 11. They, that is the followers of Jesus, our brothers and sisters, right? Like the one who accuses our brothers and sisters. They, the followers of the Lamb, they overcame him. How? Because of the blood of the Lamb. So the death of Jesus, his blood, his self-giving love, dealt with their sin, provided their redemption, granted them forgiveness. That's part of how they overcame him. And because of the word of their testimony, by their own living for Jesus and testifying to Jesus, because they did not love their life even when faced with death, even unto death. In other words, the way that Jesus won the victory is the same way his followers will ultimately overcome, by being faithful unto death. The path to victory is marked out by Jesus, and it's the path of testifying to the truth about Jesus and laying down our lives with and for Jesus. That's the path of victory. That's how God's kingdom moves forward. That's how God's people overcome. They overcame him in this way. For this reason, verse 12 says, "Rejoice, you heavens, and you who dwell in them. But woe to the earth and the sea, because the devil has come down to you with great wrath, knowing that he only has a short time." In other words, the devil's been cast down, and he knows we're on to the final stage of God's plan in history. Up next is his ultimate and final demise. And so the page is turned in salvation history, and the devil knows that we're on the final chapter of his story. And so he's angry, he's hostile, he's angry at God. He was tricked and deceived, and he thought he was going to devour the Messiah. It didn't work. And now he's been cast down and defeated. And so now he's out to destroy what God has created. And so verse 13, when the dragon saw that he was thrown down to the earth, he persecuted the woman who gave birth to the male child. In other words, the dragon was enraged. So he chased after the woman, that is Mother Zion, who had given birth to the Messiah, right? He chased after God's faithful people. But here's where we get more details on her flight into the wilderness. But the 2 wings of a great eagle were given to the woman, so that she should fly into the wilderness to her place where she was nourished for a time, times, and half a time. That phrase is equivalent to 42 months or 1,260 days, right? So she fled there for a time, times, and half a time, away from the presence of the serpent. She's going to be protected and cared for. And as I noted above, this imagery echoes the Exodus, where God redeemed Israel out of Egypt, gave her the wings of an eagle, and led her into the wilderness. Well, that's what's being pictured here now in picture language. Just like that, it's like a second Exodus. God's people are being cared for and protected and nurtured. And the serpent hurled water like a river out of his mouth after the woman, so that he might cause her to be swept away with a flood. So as John watches this story unfold, he's trying to destroy this woman. He's chased her. She gets away. So then he spews water like a giant river after her. But the earth helped the woman, and the earth opens its mouth and drank up the river that the dragon had hurled out of its mouth. So God swoops in, gives the woman these wings, carried her into the desert. The dragon causes a massive flood. The earth helps and creates a giant crack. The water goes into that, and the woman is safe. She's protected. And so God stepped in to rescue the woman. So, realizing that he couldn't destroy God's people in one fell swoop, the dragon changes his tactics, and he decides to pick them off one person at a time. So look at verse 17. So the dragon was enraged with the woman, and he went off to make war with the rest of her offspring, those who keep the commandments of God and hold to the testimony of Jesus. So the dragon can't just destroy God's people completely and totally, so he decides to make war against individual Christians, individual followers of Jesus, the children of God, and those who follow Christ. And then in the very next episode, what will happen is he'll summon 2 henchmen, 2 beasts, to help him make this war. And we will look at that in our next recording. But for now, what we see is, as John has pulled back the curtain, what we see is the real enemy. Who is it? Well, there's a supernatural battle going on. The real enemy, ultimately, that lies behind the enemies on earth is the dragon himself. And there is a cosmic war going on between God and the forces of good and the dragon and the forces of evil. And Jesus, by virtue of his life and death, resurrection, and exaltation, defeated the devil. And he knows his time is short. And what that would say to the original audience and what that would say to us should be deeply encouraging. That the dragon ultimately is lost. The decision for who's going to win this war has already been made. The Messiah has won. The dragon couldn't get him. And yes, he's going to attack God's people. Yes, he's going to make life hard on them. But he is a defeated enemy. And that's encouraging. So just a couple reflections as we wrap up this recording on Revelation chapter 12. The first is, as I noted in our comments through the passage, and that is that there's a dragon in the nativity. My kids have always laughed at this, but we should include, if we're going to be faithful to Revelation's telling of the nativity story, we should have a dragon in our nativity. It is the familiar nativity story, but different. But the heart of it's all there. You got a pregnant woman giving birth to the Messiah, the attempted destruction of the Messiah, just like Herod and others tried to destroy the Messiah. But Revelation 12 discloses that what's going on in the nativity is about something far, far bigger and far more important, far more significant than sweet little baby Jesus, right? That's what it ultimately tells us, that this world is a battleground, not a playground. It reminds us that Christmas is sort of like a covert special ops mission. It's an invasion into rebel territory to rescue the prisoners of war and to establish a rival kingdom. And Satan knows that if this baby gets out alive, then his gig is up. His days are numbered. So he throws everything he has at him right from the start. But then Jesus sucker punches him and he lets him think he's won. When Satan kills him, but then Jesus comes back to life, ascends to heaven, takes a seat on the throne, and the devil is cast down. So ultimately, the nativity story, and thus Christmas, is about 2 kingdoms in conflict. It's about the rebel empire and the real empire. It's about the devil and his desire to destroy God's plans and purposes and people. That's the rebel empire, but the real empire is the kingdom of Christ. And he is king, and he is one, and all those who are loyal to him will someday share his victory and will wear the victor's crown with him. That then leads to really the second reflection, and that is the defeat of the dragon. Revelation 12 graphically depicts for us that Jesus won. He won the decisive battle. He has taken the throne and he reigns. He is Lord of the nations. But he has a completely different approach to sovereignty and power and kingship than Rome or Moscow or Washington or any other country or empire that has ever reigned, right? Jesus' way is the way of self-sacrificial, self-giving love. Jesus' credentials for the throne come from his death, burial, and resurrection. That's how he won the decisive victory for us, self-giving love. And it's on the basis of that self-giving love that he has ascended to his throne. That's why I think it was important we read Revelation or John chapter 12, 23 through 31, so that we could hear that this is the way he was glorified. This is the way he was exalted. This is the way the devil was defeated, was through Jesus' self-giving love. And that's how he rendered the devil powerless, as Hebrews chapter 2 says. And so it's on the basis of self-giving love, then, that those who choose his side, choose Jesus' kingdom, it's on the basis of self-giving love that they also overcome the devil and overcome his strategies to destroy this world. It's not by power and might, but by the unlikely strategy of self-sacrificial, self-giving love. They did not love their life even unto death. That's how we, as the followers of Jesus, carry forward his mission, carry forward his kingdom. That's how we actually embody his victory in this world. We testify to who Jesus is, and we don't love our lives, even to the point of death. All right, thanks for tuning into this session of the Listener's Commentary on the Book of Revelation. The Listener's Commentary is a listener-supported, crowd-funded Bible teaching ministry that's only possible because of the generosity of dozens and dozens of people just like you. So thanks a ton to each and every one of you who give to make this resource and this tool available. And if you have been challenged, encouraged, blessed by this resource, could I invite you to prayerfully consider joining the team of supporters? One of the things I would love to see happen is to see the commentary translated into other languages so it can reach more people. But that takes time, that takes resources, it takes some money. And so as resources come available, we're going to look at doing that. We're already working on laying some groundwork for some of that. So if you've been challenged or blessed in any way, I would love to see you join the team of supporters so that this ministry can continue to grow and reach more and more people. Thanks a ton for your support.